This is a story around 1988, 1989 in Ecuador. I have had some success quite a lot of success, I should say, in Peru doing debt for goods swap. So at that time, Midland Bank, which then became HSBC, asked me to try if I could find some other type of solution in Ecuador. We had a colleague whose name was Hans van Oort, a Dutch guy. Rodrigo Borja was married to the first cousin of Hans van Oort's wife. And they were very close because at some point President Borja had to go into exile a few years ago, and the Van Oorts were living in Panama, and they gave asylum to President Borja, Rodrigo Borja, and therefore they were very close because Rodrigo Borja stayed at their home. So we started going to Ecuador. Hans van Oort moved to Ecuador. Every time we went to Quito, the capital, President Borja would invite us for lunch. So it was this huge table for, 24, 36 people. And we were, sometimes we were 3 people at the table, sometimes we were 4 people at the table. Sometimes the person he would invite would be the Minister of Interior, whose last name was Vallejo, closely associated to the most reputable newspaper in Ecuador called El Comercio. So we were trying to find transactions where we could see if we could recover the debt. And I will not go into detail as the options that we were contemplating, which were different from what we were doing in Peru, because what we were trying to do was bespoke or made to measure to what Ecuador needed. But we needed a decree from the Ministry of Finance. So thanks to the contacts of President Borja, we would see the Minister of Finance at the time, who was Minister Jorge Gallardo, and we met with him a few times, but then we tried and we were not making progress. So and I was then trying to get new appointments, and even with the help of President Borja, he was always busy, he cancelled at the last minute, so it was very hard to see. So then I attended this steering committee meeting, which was at that time chaired by Citibank, and they were in fact chairs for all the steering committees for Latin America. There was a legendary figure at Citibank, was called Bill Rhodes. And Bill Rhodes, who was the chair of all these steering committees. So I go to the steering committee meeting in New York, where of course Minister Gallardo was present across the table, and we had 3 days of discussions about the restructuring of the debt of the country, and we had lunch together, and we exchanged niceties amongst each other, and we had general conversations, but it was inappropriate to have that conversation in front of 10 other bankers, as these were very private conversations. Throughout this time, I knew he was at the Intercontinental Hotel. I was also at the Intercontinental Hotel, and but there was never a good time to meet. And and I needed that meeting to try and lock the transaction. So then I got a little bit anxious as to what I should do. So I found out through a contact when he was going back to Ecuador. I didn't know, what airline he was taking or whatever, but I knew he was leaving on a certain day in the late afternoon. Early afternoon, I paid for the hotel. I had my carry-on ready, and I sat in a very subtle location at the lobby, waiting for him to come out. So finally, at some point, he comes out, he goes, pays the bill. The moment that he leaves the hotel, I go behind him, I see him take a taxi, and then I go to the taxi behind him and I say, go after this car. So my taxi followed the taxi of Minister Gallardo, and of course the airline that he took to go back to Ecuador was Ecuatoriana de Aviación. It was called Compañía Ecuatoriana de Aviación, and it's a company that's now disappeared, unfortunately. And so I waited for him to go and check in. And once he checked in, I went to the counter and I said, look, I want to buy a ticket in first class. Just tell me where Jorge Gallardo is sitting. And they tell me he is sitting in 1A. So I said, well, is 1B free? And they told me yes. So then I said, okay, I'll buy 1B. And I took out my credit card, bought the ticket, and suddenly I was sitting right next to Mr. Gallardo for the entire flight back to Ecuador. Of course, I didn't need the entire flight. It was a night flight, so we were all trying to sleep. But it gave me the opportunity to have the conversation that I was missing. And then when I went to Ecuador, I already had a wink from the minister that we will do the deal, and that's how I was able to lock the transaction. So, that just shows that, you have to be resourceful. You have to do things that are outside the box. Maybe, some people would consider this harassment, but I think at the end what I did was both beneficial for HSBC and beneficial for Ecuador, because as a result of that we were able to restore, for example, all trade facilities to Ecuadorian banks. So this is my story in Ecuador. I hope you like it.